Welcome to Preparing for the Unexpected. Today, I'd like to talk about an article I came across on the conversation.com by Imran Mir at the University of Glasgow, entitled Why Organizations Pick the Wrong Leaders. And from previous conversations, I knew today's guest would be the perfect person to talk to. And I'd like to welcome back Treena Reilkoff. Treena, welcome back.
I'm glad to be back. I'm excited about the topic because it's a common topic.
Yes, it is. Considering a lot of us leave our jobs
Mhm.
because of the boss. So my first question to you is, why does leadership believe that visible traits define a leader, such as confidence, articulate, good looking type thing?
I think it's again biases how we were raised, biases in culture, biases in who coached us, who was our mentor, who and what does that look like? And unless we challenge our biases, we don't know, we're not aware of who we're picking as leaders. Right? So when they say there's that new way of hiring to kind of make it more inclusive is taking out the name of the person, taking out, some identifying factors and just looking at what does their resume entail? What does that interview look like? Could you have an interview without knowing the person's name, seeing whether they're, male, female, or cisgender, or however they want to, classify yourself, what culture you are, how does an accent influence? So I think it's our biases and not being aware of it. Or organizations have their little checky box of what they're looking for. So it's cherry picked. It might
Yeah.
not be your qualifications or your experience. It might be the cherry pick because you're willing to do what you need to do for the company, for the organization.
I guess it kind of reinforces that you have to be seen to be doing something.
Yes,
So if you're not actually doing it like you suggested, well, then people aren't seeing it. So that
right.
isn't
And
really
is
happening.
yeah, and is seeing, what does seeing mean, and who gets to determine the box that's seeing and what it looks like and fits into the company's organization's values, mission statement, outcomes.
Right. So what happens if the wrong person is chosen to be a leader? If it's based on, our biases, what happens down the road? Could happen.
Well, well, if you look now, like around the world, we're seeing where leadership is a psychosocial hazard. It is like in under Canada, when you're doing the guarding minds and you do the workplace culture assessment, risk assessments, leadership is one of the factors that is considered a hazard. And, in Australia, because it's now under legislation, when wrong leaders are picked, now the increase in conflict leads to lost time, money, reputation, retention. It could potentially be that workplace violence and harassment complaint, the burnout of employees, the grievance, the human rights complaint. So wrong leaders that are not coached into how to change that behavior contribute to the tangible and intangible costs that businesses will face, whether right there on the newspaper headline or you have over half of your employees off on sick leave, burnout, and then another quarter are just leaving.
Yeah, which we mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
People, because I've been hearing that for decades. People leave, not all, but people leave because of their boss.
Yeah. And just before this, I kind of, because I went to one of my old workplace assessments and I wanted to get the criteria of what is it assessing when leadership is identified as a hazard in the workplace. And some of the examples were that the leader does not provide a lack of clear vision or objectives. Management style is unsuited to the nature of the work. They fail to listen or casually listen to complaints and suggestions, but don't take any action. They withhold information. They lack accountability, lack fairness, inconsistent and poor decision making practices, or they commonly abuse or misuse power.
Hmm. Well, it's interesting you mentioned the complaints that go addressed, shall we say, because one of the other topics I wanted to talk about at some point
Mhm.
was an article I came across that had people talking about how they had made complaints against leaders who weren't fit for their roles and
Yeah,
what other department leads and HR did or didn't do about it. And then I kind of changed my mind because I didn't want to seem as though I was picking on HR people or
yeah,
anyone specific. So I'm not going to do it. But it kind of that leadership, they all have to work together as leaders as well. It can't just be the one person, because if one
yeah,
person is making these mistakes, well, then it could be because of the biases you mentioned earlier
yeah,
that is allowing that person to continually make those mistakes because those other people kind of have those same biases themselves.
yeah. And it's looking at mistakes, right? We're all human. Nobody is perfect. So why can't we give ourselves grace? Why can't we allow, no matter what status role you're in, that when that mistake is made, you take the accountability, you make it transparent, and then we learn from it, right? So if you don't, or if you're missing as a leader certain performance competencies that are creating the hazards, the complaints, the lack of retention, people quitting, burnout, sick leave, why are we not looking at, okay, what is that missing performance competency? Because everybody needs coaching. Nobody's perfect,
I was
right?
just
And
going
conflict
to
has
ask that.
onions. Yeah, like when it's conflict, you're unpeeling the layers of the onions and how you approach it, right? Looking at again neurotypical, neurodiverse, how our brains work, how we are and our experiences. At the end of the day, everybody wants to have some sense making and meaning making to I put a complaint forward, nothing happened, or why is nothing happening? And sometimes, you're not the decision maker. You cannot fully share all the reasons why, but that closing that feedback loop reduces conflict, reduces the risk of losing retention, reduces the risk of more complaints going in, reduces the risk of people burning out.
Mhm. Well, you mentioned responsibilities there. Sometimes I think that's part of the problem as well, is responsibilities and accountabilities aren't clearly defined in either a leadership role, no matter where you are on the ladder.
Yeah.
Um, they're not clear because we've all heard that saying, you know what flows downhill.
Yeah, yeah. And ambiguity is a threat. It is a psychosocial hazard. So if there's ambiguity, lack of clear communications, concise, unknown information, how, as a leader, do you communicate the sense making and meaning making to others? And
Mhm.
how do you create that psychologically safe environment to have those hard, difficult conversations?
Yeah,
How do you create that fairness and transparency and protecting confidentiality, but it doesn't mean you can't close those feedback loops, right? The world is no longer command control.
right.
Psychological health and safety is now like in the ISO standards around the world, creating a psychological safe place, that environment where you can speak up without being reprimanded, feared. And then psychosocial risks and hazards, they are there. We have to protect our mental health. So instead of being that natural human threat response of fight, flight, freeze, as soon as conflict or disagreement or something's not working, as a leader, if a leader goes in and somebody puts a complaint, why are so many leaders afraid of 360 feedback loop
Mm,
interviews in the employment place, right?
yeah,
Don't you want to embrace what you're deficit at and grow and be coached and learn? Because that's what a leader is. They grow, coach, and learn, and then they help bring others up. Unless you're a manager, where managers checky box, you're just doing compliance, checky box, no decision making authority, and your reputation is on the line. So it's deciding and reflecting sometimes too. Are you a manager in how you show up and do your role, or are you a leader?
yeah. Are there things we should be doing institutionally, like universities, or foundationally through organizational training and development programs to rectify the problems with leadership? Are there things that we could do and show people early so that we're not ending up with leaders who are actually managers or leaders who are simply shouldn't be there at
Yeah.
all?
I think, well, again, it comes down to education, training, and identifying the performance competency deficits to have those filled. But if you don't know what your baseline organization or business is in regards to your psychosocial hazards and risks, how can you implement anything in prevention, promotion, and upskilling, right? Because all we can ever do is upskill.
Right.
So if you can't and don't have a baseline and doing an engagement survey, that's just one facet. You need to do the full culture psychosocial risk assessment to get a baseline of what is your culture, what is the status of leadership, is recognition and reward, which is one of the most cost-free opportunities to recognize people give back, and people always want to give more. Everybody wants to come to work and do their best and be their best. But if your environment and your leader is not allowing that opportunity, that environment, how can you expect the outcomes of your organization or business to grow? And if you can't identify those risks, those hazards, you're just going to be doing the hamster wheel. Nothing's going to change. And again, it's like when I used to be a behavioral consultant way back in the day in mental health in Alberta, it's like we're all human, right? Negative is the first go-to for us. We got to start recognizing our own adrenal response, our own emotional regulation under conflict, under high chaos, complex decisions, and how we speak to people. Because how you speak to them either creates a threat response or brings them in for, could be the very most difficult conversation. But how do you create that safety, that comfort? If doctors in a merge where they have to go tell patients about the loss of a loved one or tell a patient they're losing a limb or something is very, you're dying, how do they go in and create that environment to give hard information in a safe manner, but also emotionally regulate that their tone, their cadence, their choice of words is creating safety? So if the profession in the medical field can do this in high risk, why can't we, you know, pivot? Why can't we integrate that same line of thinking as leaders? You
Hmm.
can give the most difficult information to anybody, but if you prepare and create that respect, that accountability, even if you mess up, what is the biggest way to reduce conflict is just saying, yeah, I messed up. This is where I messed up. This is what I'm going to do better. When we know better, we do better.
Yeah. And we've come to the end of the episode. Any final thoughts you'd like to share on leadership and why organizations always end up choosing the wrong the wrong people?
Yeah. I think just anybody who's a leader, right? A leader doesn't have to be your defined role. You can be a leader and not hold a status in an organization or in a company, but it's that self-reflection of just upskilling and how can we do better for the company, for ourselves, for employees, for our coworkers. If we don't take time to self-reflect and identify our biases and upskill our risk intelligence, our risk tolerance, right? You got to go have a hard decision. Ask yourself, are you starting to feel that fight, flight, freeze responses? What is your risk tolerance to go have a hard decision rather than command, control, dictate, this is what's going to be done, and then run away when people have questions, right? People are going, why? Let's have some sense making, meaning making. But when you give direction and you run away, are you actually having a threat response in yourself because you don't want to answer those questions and don't know how?
Yeah.
So that's self-reflection, right? My little motto, move from SOS to SRSR. Self-reflection strengthens resiliency. Resiliency is risk management.
Yeah. On that note, we've come to the end of the episode. Treena, thank you so much for joining us today. And by the way, Treena is joining us from Bahamas. So she's joining us on her vacation.
Thank you. Always a pleasure being here.